To get all my distractions out of the way, like my phone. Yes. Good e-
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. How are you, sir?
Hello. Good evening to you.
Yeah, good morning to you, sir. Nice
I'm
meeting
ready
you, sir.
whenever you are. It's nice to meet you and everybody else who hopefully will be joining us as we go.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good. Well, I would like to say that I planned it all out, over 30 years ago, but of course, you can't necessarily plan everything in life that comes your way. So I have, ever since I was a child, growing up watching the Apollo moon landings, I have just been fascinated by space and space exploration and the idea of human beings settling on the moon and Mars, eventually even beyond that. And I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't know what that was going to look like. So going to work at IBM as a systems engineer at Johnson Space Center was a way to be a part of the space program at the time. And this was in the 1980s during the space shuttle. But ironically, after doing that for about 5 years, I became very disenchanted because I realized it wasn't the same NASA that had taken us to the moon. It was just a different kind of organization. The space shuttle was not nearly as exciting as the Apollo moon landing. So I stayed working in IT for several decades, as you mentioned, sometimes working with aerospace, sometimes not. But I started looking around in the late 1980s and early 90s for other ways to be involved. I discovered the Space Frontier Foundation in the late 1980s, which was the first organization to come into existence to support entrepreneurs in the space industry. Now, back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, that was a crazy idea that businesses could do something in space. And look how far we've come since then. So that's that's when I started to do a lot of different things in the space community, speaking at conferences and writing for publications and then blogging eventually. And over time, I slowly, at first it was slowly, started to transition away from my IT career to start doing speaking and writing and consulting relevant to the commercial space industry. And starting about, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, that's all I do now. I haven't done any work related to information technology for, a good couple of years now. So it's not a path I could have planned by any means. I think it's just an indication, at least the way I take it is an indication if you really know in your heart what's important to you and what you want to do, you may not know the path, but if you just keep doing what matters to you, if all of you that are listening, you're really passionate about space, you may not know what you'll be doing 10 or 20 years from now, but you just keep focused on what matters to you, and you'll probably do more than you might even think at this point. So it's been a journey for sure. Sometimes frustrating and difficult, but it's been also very rewarding and very fulfilling. So that was maybe a longer answer than you were anticipating. But
No issue. That is a great thing. And your voice is little bit not audible, sir.
I'm sorry, say again?
Sir, your voice is not that much audible. It is breaking actually.
Are you asking about my wife? I can't quite tell.
No, sir,
Breaking up.
voice. Your voice is not audible.
Oh, my voice is not. Is this better?
Yes, sir. Now a little bit better, sir. Yes.
Okay, I'll just sit closer to the microphone.
Yes, sir. Okay. Sir, actually, you have a great experience in IBM systems for 25 years, right? So, what are the major roles and responsibilities you have had when working in IBM sector?
Well, just to clarify, so I worked with IBM for about 12 years.
Okay.
And then the rest of the time, I continued for another 15, 16 years to work in IT, but for other companies over that time. So my entire IT career has not been just with IBM, but it was IBM that gave me the opportunity to work with NASA. And then when I left IBM in the 1990s, when I was working for a different company and into the early 2000s, I wasn't really doing much with the space program for that period of time, not professionally. That's when I began to get very heavily involved on a personal basis. As I mentioned earlier, I started speaking at conferences. I started organizing conferences for the Space Frontier Foundation and running them. Started doing a little bit of writing for various newsletters. So that was all because it was very important to me. It wasn't part of my career. I wasn't being paid for that. It was something I was doing because it was a real passion of mine. It still is. But what that did was it gave me a lot of exposure in the entrepreneurial space community. People could see the kind of things that I could do, the kind of work that I could do, and that became a very huge thing because so many of those people that I knew at the Space Frontier Foundation, I became a board member, so I started to get involved with the leadership of the organization. And in 2005, when I was at the very early stages of starting to do space-related consulting, the chairman of the board of Space Frontier Foundation asked me to become their full-time executive director. And so that was, for me, a big step because that was my first full-time space job. And I did that for 3 years. And that really was a huge turning point for me to shift from IT to doing more space-related work.
Okay. Aishwarya ma'am is having one question, so she will be asking.
Yes, sir. Sir, how could you have attained the projects of NASA Johnson Space Center with your teams?
So, the projects at NASA that I worked on, I was part of a team, an IBM team, and also working with other aerospace contractors. So this was a very large team. I was one of just a few people. One of a lot of people on this team. And so my role as a systems engineer was I was responsible for one of the departments at Johnson Space Center, and keeping all their IBM systems running properly and helping them, upgrade when it was time to do that. So it wasn't so much, if I understand your question, it wasn't so much that I got to pick and choose the projects. I worked on the projects that were, something that a very large team handled. So, did I understand your question correctly?
Completely, sir. Completely, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
Sir, actually,
It was,
there was, yes.
I was just going to say that was a really amazing experience because at that time I was, pretty much fresh out of graduate school. I was, in my early and mid 20s, learning a lot, making a lot of mistakes, because I was young and new in this job and in this field, the IT field. So it was a fabulous learning experience. Being trained by IBM was a tremendous experience. I had a couple of excellent managers early in my career, which was great. I also had a couple that were not very good and, that I did not work well with. And so that, certainly can create some problems early in a career. But again, looking back, I learned a lot from that, especially you learn, if you're open to it, you learn a lot from your mistakes.
That's good, sir. Sir, since you are from North Carolina of US, United States, we have one question. What is mean by North Carolina Research Triangle Area?
The Research Triangle area?
Yes, sir.
So I live, as you said, I live in North Carolina, which is on the east coast of the United States, in case, people who are listening aren't familiar with that. So, and the Research Triangle is a geographic area that's bounded by three cities, which is why it's called the Triangle. So I live in the smaller of the three cities called Chapel Hill. There's a major university here, University of North Carolina, and then Durham, North Carolina. That's another one of the cities, and Duke University is in Durham. That's another major university, and then Raleigh, which is the capital of North Carolina, has NC State, North Carolina State University, which is a major aerospace engineering university, by the way. So Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, they sort of form the points of the triangle. And it's called the Research Triangle because back in the 1960s, the governor of North Carolina at that time was a very rural state and not a lot of technology from a business and industry point of view. It was mostly tobacco farming and furniture manufacturing and some financial. So the governor had a vision of developing an area called the Research Triangle that would become a very high-tech hub, a research and development and manufacturing hub, and really elevate those capabilities in North Carolina and take advantage of the universities, the three universities I mentioned, and the education that they were providing for students. So the Research Triangle, and that's what the area is generally called, although there's a specific area called Research Triangle Park, has hundreds of companies now. IBM used to be a big company in the area. It's not as big as it used to be, but there's a lot of pharmaceuticals here, a lot of medical device manufacturing, a lot of IT and telecom technology companies here, a lot of biotech companies. So there's a lot of startups here, a lot of entrepreneurial activity. Ironically, considering the work that I do, there's very little aerospace work in the Research Triangle. There's some aerospace business, but it's spread around the state, but there's almost nothing in the Research Triangle. I've done some consulting with a few companies here in the area, but most of my work is in other parts of the US or Europe, and sometimes in Asia.
Okay.
So, then what are the problems you have faced while doing the research on this particular area in or aerospace economy?
Sure. So when I first started doing this, I'm going to think back here. I had my first two projects when I moved to North Carolina in 2003, was when I started to develop my space consulting work, which took many years. It was a lot harder to do than I thought it would be. I really had no clue how challenging it was going to be to create a new career, when I was leaving IT. So I had started, just networking when I moved here. And so one of the first people I met was an aerospace person, a professor at NC State University, who also ran what's called the North Carolina Space Grant. So just a brief bit on that. NASA funds a lot of universities to do research, and those are called space grants. And so each state, almost every state, has a space grant. So North Carolina, and they're always at a university. So North Carolina's is at NC State, and this person gave me two grants over about a year to do some research to see, were there companies in North Carolina that were focused on aerospace that would be interested in working with entrepreneurs in the space industry. And so my job with those grants was to educate these economic development organizations around the state. And so this was in 2005, so 15 years ago, when the NewSpace industry didn't exist like it does today. So one of the challenges, to answer your question, was getting a lot of these economic development officials and local state government officials to understand this is a real industry. This is coming. This is happening. And this is not the same thing as NASA. And it was very difficult to get a lot of people. There were some who understood, who got it. They understood what I was describing to them, what I was showing them. But there were many who did not. They had in their minds the image of, if you said space, they immediately thought of NASA and the space shuttle and the space station and government. And they just could not think of how startup companies and entrepreneurs could do anything in space. Now, look how much further we've come in 15 years, right? Because of so much work with CubeSats and small satellites in the commercial world. It's a big reason. So that was a significant challenge, was you are trying to get people to think differently about something where they already have a frame of mind. It's a challenge. And some people are more locked into their views than others. So some people were able to, as I said, see what I was showing them, the opportunity. Others were not. So that was a huge challenge 15 years ago. Today, it's not such a hard challenge because so much has happened in the entrepreneurial and commercial side of the space industry in the last 15 years.
Okay. That is a great thing where your NASA is doing over there. And one of our student is asking some question also. What is expected from young aerospace engineering students or skills, aerospace engineering skills, so that they can get internship in US?
Okay, and it's funny, just as you were starting to read that, I saw that there was a question in the chat, so I just opened that up as well.
Okay.
So that's something I'm really happy to talk about. So I would say from an engineering skills perspective, it's nothing that I would imagine that you as engineering students already aren't aware of. What you need to learn to be an aerospace engineer, you already know that, right? I mean, that's why you're in school. And aerospace engineering, it doesn't matter if you're working for a company in India or in Germany or the United States. If you're going to build rockets, if you're going to build satellites, you need to have the same skills no matter where you're working. So for me, what is equally important is, beyond the engineering skills that you develop, is if you're going to work, and I want to make an important distinction here. Right now, my comments are geared toward if you're going to work for a company in the commercial business world versus the government contractor world, because they're very different. At least they are here in the United States. I can't speak to what it would be like in India if you went to work for ISRO versus going to work for, NewSpace started, but I can tell you what I'm familiar with from my experience here. You're going to go work for a startup company or a more established company. Your business skills, your communication skills are going to be really important, especially if you're part of a small startup company. You may be the most talented engineer that has ever walked the planet, but if you have business skills on top of that, and I mean understand that you may create the most amazing technology as an engineer, and you may start a company as an engineer and have the most amazing technology,
Yes.
but that doesn't mean anyone's going to buy it, right? And if you start a company and nobody buys what you create, your company will not survive. It's simple.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm talking about when I say business skills are equally important, because you have to know how to develop a business plan. You have to understand the markets where you want to sell your product. You have to understand who are your potential customers.
Yes.
You have to understand how to sell to them. And here's something I have observed many, many times. This is not a criticism. This is an observation. So I have coached a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurs. A lot of them are engineers. So this is part of my co-managing NewSpace business plan competition. So I have seen many, many presentations by engineers who are preparing to pitch their company to a panel of investors. And why are you an engineer? Because you love engineering, right?
Yes.
You love technology.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, and I get it. I love technology too. That's why I became a systems engineer. So, but here's the challenge. I would see this time and time again. The person who started the company is an engineer because they invented something really cool. Now they want to start a company. So they start running through their presentation, and 90% of their talk is about the technology, about the engineering, because it's what they love and it's what you're comfortable with. And that's all fabulous. But when you're pitching to an investor or you're trying to sell to a customer, if you're talking to another engineer, they're going to love all that technology. But a lot of times, the person who's going to make the buying decision is not an engineer. The investor is not an engineer. And so you need to be able to also communicate and help them understand what your technology is going to do, what business problem it's going to solve. Why should you buy this really cool thing that I created? And here's why I started this company. And that's not always an easy thing to learn to do, because it requires engineers to talk in a different way than when they're talking to other engineers. And so that is something I cannot overemphasize, the importance of being able to give presentations and talk with, have communications with business decision makers, and they want to hear different things than the engineer. You may go into a company and your first meeting will be with an engineer. And that's great, because they'll understand why your technology, why your product is really cool, and they'll get excited and they'll be enthusiastic about it. But then they have to go convince their boss sometimes why that boss should listen to you. And their boss is a manager, and he may be an engineering person, but he's also got to be thinking from a business perspective. So I know I'm repeating myself here, and I'm doing it because it's very, very important. That is to add those kinds of skills to your engineering skills will be tremendously useful. So then I see the second part of the question is getting internships in the United States. So I can't speak to the challenges of visas and all of that stuff. So I'm not going to address that issue. I'm going to stick to the business part of that question in my answer. There are a lot of companies in this country in the space industry, whether they are big established firms or small companies with 5, 10, 20, 50 people, that are all looking for interns. Now, are those paying positions? Probably not, most of them. But you get tremendous experience, and it's a way to get a foot in the door in that company and show what you're capable of doing. So yes, there are a lot of internship opportunities at space companies in the United States. I imagine there are in Europe. I don't know how extensive new space entrepreneurship is in India. I don't have a good sense of, are there many space startups in your country? I'd love to hear somebody tell me a little bit about that if you want. But there's definitely internship opportunities at these companies in the United States.
Yes, sir. To add that, our students also engaging in like they are bringing into the new startups so that they can contribute to the space community. They are coming up with ideas, various ideas they are coming up. So soon we will be also contributing into space transportations also. And one of
Well,
the
and that
student,
So,
that if you've got ideas,
yes,
right, it's one thing to just ask a company, do you have an internship for me?
hmm,
But like you were suggesting, if you have a proposal, right, if you do your research on a company where you want to work and you say, I see you're working on this, I can help you with this, and I'm willing to come and work for you for 3 months or 6 months, at no pay or half pay or whatever, if there's an opportunity maybe to work with you
okay,
down the road. And so you're right. If you have a proposal or an idea specific to that company, that's great.
okay,
so as you have said that to build a startup, right? So we must have both the skills like entrepreneurship as well as technology must go side by side, right? So what kind of strategy plan or you have followed for in your aerospace industries?
So one part of that is recognizing that once you create a strategy, it's not cast in concrete. You have to be willing at some point, because it will happen. You'll begin to realize your strategy isn't working. Why? Something's changed in the marketplace. You know, technologies have changed, so what you originally developed may not be as useful as it originally was. So when you're developing a strategy, you need to keep that in mind. I don't know if you've heard the phrase living document. A strategic plan should be thought of as a living document, not something you write and then put in a binder and put on the shelf and that's it. And that's what a lot of companies do. They go to all that effort and then they put their strategic plan in a drawer or they put it in a folder on their PC and they forget to look at it. So it should be a guide to how you think about the direction of the company. So when you create a startup, you'll have to create a business plan, and then that business plan needs to be your strategic plan. And ideally, it's not. Just think about the difference between tactical and strategic. The tactical is short term, and you need more details on how you're going to implement, what tasks you're going to do on a daily basis. Whereas a strategic plan should be more representative of long-term vision, long-term goals. But you don't know what your day-to-day activities are going to be 3 months from now or 6 months from now. So strategic plans, sometimes I've seen entrepreneurs try to make it too detailed and it becomes too rigid, and then they have a hard time accepting that they have to adjust their plan. I've had that experience with a couple of failed startups that I was involved with. Because in both cases, the person that started those two companies would not adapt to what was going on that was forcing that person, those two leaders in those two companies, to have to change their initial idea, and they refused to do so. And so those two companies that I was involved with failed. So as you develop your strategic plan as part of the business plan, think about it as something that, every quarter, every 3 months, you sit down with your leadership team, or if it's a small company, it's everybody in your company. And every 3 months, if not more often, but at a minimum, every 3 months, you look at that plan and you honestly assess what's worked, what hasn't worked. If something hasn't worked, you better change it. And so that speaks to the need to pay attention to the market, to pay attention to technology advances that affect what you created, right? So that's how you have to think of a strategic plan.
Okay, bro.
Sir, what will you say about that criticism? If you are coming up with some innovative ideas, right, with some kind of thing. So, do you think that criticism is a good thing, or how to overcome that criticism?
You mean if someone is criticizing your plan?
Yes, exactly, sir. Or plan
Okay,
or strategy or innovating something new. Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's a fabulous question because it touches on a lot of things that are not specific to engineering, right? So think about this a couple ways. I'm going to go back to a comment I made earlier. Sometimes you create a company because you have such an amazing idea for a new technology that no one else has thought of. And if you're successful, you're going to have a huge impact. You're going to change things. I mean, think of the iPhone as an example, right? So there will be resistance from people and companies that don't want to see that change happen because it will impact their business. So they'll be critical of what you want to do because they'll be wanting to stop you, be wanting to make it difficult for you. So that's one type of criticism, and you have to be prepared for that. What I really want to say that I feel is more important is even when you're working with your colleagues, say 3 or 4 or 5 of you start a company together, you're not always going to agree on everything. How well can you work together when there's disagreement? How well can you work together when your best friend, another engineer, or maybe the business person that's also passionate about space starts a company with you, and at some point you have a serious disagreement on an important decision that you have to make that can have a huge impact on the future of your company. How do you handle that? How do you handle when your best friend is criticizing something that you want to do that you think is really important? So here's what I'm getting at. Criticism can be perceived in an emotional way or an unemotional way. Can you get your ego out of the way? That's the big thing. If you started the company, you have a lot of ego invested in that because it was your idea and it means everything to you. And if you're like a lot of entrepreneurs, you live, you breathe that company, right? You sacrifice a lot to succeed with that company. And if someone criticizes, which will happen because you have different points of view, you and your team, can you get your ego out of the way? That's the most important thing I can say to you is you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to step back and say, this is not about me. This is about the success of this company. You don't want to have everybody always thinking the same way because it's much more valuable and powerful to get different points of view to help you see things differently and help understand when you have to make adjustments. So, get your ego out of the way and don't get emotional when you're being criticized. But then the other side of that coin is I'm going to speak to the person who is doing the criticizing. Okay? Don't make it personal. Don't let yourself in the heat of discussion, disagreement, get angry and you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. That makes it so hard, obviously, to keep working together for the good of the company. And I realize that's easier said than done. We all have our limits of when we get frustrated and then we get angry and whatever. And those moments will come when you're working with your friends, colleagues in a company. You all have to leave your egos at the door when you come in
Yes,
as
sir.
best as you can.
Okay.
Truly said, sir. Truly said, sir. Right. Yeah.
Sir, one question from like our listeners. So they have asked that what type of products are being developed in the orbital transport industry company? What type of products are developed?
So I'm going to break the industry into two primary sectors, launch vehicles and satellites. Because that's where the bulk of the startup work is right now, developing small launch vehicles for small satellites and building small satellites, creating constellations. I'm sure you've seen the projections that over the next 10 years, there'll be thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit, for Internet of Things connectivity, machine to machine, for telecommunications, for Earth conservation, all kinds of applications. So if you are thinking, all right, well, gee, what kind of technology should I be focusing on as an engineer? I would say anything that contributes to what a satellite can do functionally, right? So if you think about Earth observation, different kinds of sensors, right? Radar, infrared, all different kinds of sensors, antennas, power systems. The big challenge for small satellites is they're small, so you can only cram so much power into them. You can only have so many components inside a 1U or a 3U CubeSat. So one of the big challenges now, and if this is something that you're particularly good at, is miniaturizing electronic components, right? Or additive manufacturing. The ability to make antennas, power systems, sensors, anything that goes into a satellite smaller and more robust and require less power and have a longer lifespan, that's all very valuable. And that's really important on the launch vehicle side. So a lot of the focus there is on more efficient propulsion systems, right? And let me go back to satellites. Propulsion is a big thing with satellites. A lot of startup money, a lot of investor money is flowing into startups that are developing new kinds of propulsion for satellites: electric, water, some kind of hybrid systems that aren't the same types of thrusters that have been used for decades. So a lot of investor money is going into those kinds of startups. Okay, so back to the launch vehicle side. Anything that makes propulsion more efficient, anything that reduces the weight of the launch vehicle. And that's why I mentioned additive manufacturing. So those are very key technologies. On the software side, anything related to artificial intelligence, I can't think of the phrase I'm trying to think of, but this machine learning, all of that is crucial because these satellites are going to be tasked with doing activities that gather tremendous amounts of data. And so more than analysts can handle quickly. So algorithmic learning, machine learning, AI, all of that is very important in what's going on in the commercial satellite world because of the application those satellites are being used for. And then relevant to that is communication between these constellations that are going to, like Starlink, right, is the largest, right now, these small satellites in low Earth orbit. Well, imagine all the ground satellite communication that has to occur, right? So one of the challenges has been developing low-cost flat panel antennas for use on the ground, right? On the commercial side, if you're a consumer, you're not going to spend thousands of dollars for an antenna. And the companies are working hard to create flat panel antennas versus the old style, mechanically steerable antenna. But the cost has to come down to a couple $100 before a person is likely to buy them. That's a challenge right now in the satellite business. So those are some examples of if you're looking for areas where engineering talent is needed, those are some of the areas.
Sir,
Yeah, sir, one of our students have asked that whether we can do any collaborative projects with your company.
With my company, so Orbital Transports is a startup. It's 5 years old. And right now, there's 5 people with the company. And the CEO, in fact, I just spoke with him about this a couple of days ago. He is in the process of interviewing, or is about to be, probably within the next month or so, because we're getting into the summer now. And that's a lot of times when internships get started. Although, of course, given the COVID situation, students aren't at university right now anyway, although they're finishing up their semesters online, and they're often more available in the summer. So the Orbital Transport's headquarters is in Chicago. And so there's several major universities there where the CEO is finding all the talent that he needs for internship. So Orbital Transports is not of the size where it needs to look outside of Chicago for interns, let alone outside the United States. So in that company, I'm sorry, there wouldn't be an opportunity. And then for my small consulting firm, that's just a partner and myself. And again, we're not a manufacturer. We don't do engineering work. we do business consulting. So there wouldn't be internship opportunities with us either.
Okay. Another one question is what is the major area that Earth Space Commerce Advisors is working at?
So we're focused on a couple areas. I mean, for me, my particular area of expertise is business development, market research, developing partner networks. Those are the things I'm doing with orbital transport. So I help identify, and this is the work I've done with clients, especially companies that have a technology that will be useful in the space industry on the commercial side, but they've never worked on the commercial side. They've worked just with government contractors who don't really know the commercial market. They don't really know who their potential customers are. So I help companies understand who their customers are, who they can be selling to, and then make introductions and help with business development that way, market research that way. My partner, who lives in South Carolina, which is, as you might imagine, is the state below North Carolina. So he has a background in next generation automotive technology as well as satellite technology, but also more so than myself, one of his areas of expertise is finding non-traditional sources of funding. So in other words, funding that doesn't necessarily come from investors. So that's something he's been doing for quite a long time. So those are the capabilities that he and I bring together to our clients.
Okay, sir. So, as a vice president, you have been working for several years or decades. So, thing is that which type of startup will you suggest to our aerospace students to bring in a new era, new space?
The industry, launch vehicles and satellites, where there are gaps in technology that are needed to improve the efficiency and capabilities, all those areas, if your focus as an engineer, it's not that you want to build something, but you want to do the research and development that advances new technologies, all those areas that I mentioned before, hardware and software, those are the areas I would focus on. If you wanted to create a startup focused on research and development, those are the areas I would focus on. And that's an interesting idea because there is certainly a recognition on the part of larger companies and government space programs that there are technologies that are not yet as mature as we need them to be. And I'll give you an example of how that works in the United States in terms of how the federal government helps startups that are developing technologies that are useful to the government, whether it's NASA or the military. So NASA and many other government agencies as part of the U.S. federal government have what are called, I don't know if you've ever heard of SBIRs or STTRs, that's specific in the United States. I imagine ISRO has something similar, and the European Space Agency, I know they do. But those are SBIRs, a Small Business Innovation Research Grant, SBIR. And then STTR is the next phase. If you win an SBIR grant and your work is successful, then you typically get a second grant. Sometimes you have to go through the application process again for an STTR, which is more of a technology, a more in-depth technology grant. So these are ways, and a lot of startups, this is where they get their initial funding, is they get grants because their technology is of specific interest to NASA or maybe the U.S. Air Force or the U.S. Navy, for example. And so if you're thinking about starting an R&D startup, and if ISRO funds startups like that, then I would imagine ISRO has a list of these are the technologies we need to have developed. That's how it's done. That's one of the ways it's done here. The different government agencies that have funding for those types of grants have lists that they update. Here's the technology we need to have developed. And so a lot of entrepreneurs will look at that. They'll start a company to develop that technology, and apply for those grants. And if they get those grants, that's, as I said, often the first sources of funding for a startup. Now, let's say you go that route. Let's say you're able to get a grant from ISRO, or I don't know if European Space Agency also works with companies in India. I don't know. But let's say you get a grant from a government space program, right? Challenge is, if you get really good at that and you're able to get multiple grants over a couple of years, you have to be wary that you don't have your business plan rely 100% on those government grants. Still need to understand how are you going to take that technology that you develop with government funding and find commercial customers for it. And I've seen startups become almost addicted to, if you will, these government grants because they get them, they're good at it, they keep coming, and you're a startup. There's 3, 4, 5 of you. You don't have the time. All of you are working on these, the research funded by the grants, so you don't have the time to be thinking about what the potential commercial customer. But you need to do that. You don't want to get locked into the government pipeline because you won't be there forever.
Okay,
Does
sir.
that help?
Yes, sir. I think that is the last question, sir.
Everybody's muted, so I'm not hearing you.
Yes, sir. That is the last question. I think so. There is no more question from our end, and also from audience perspective, there is no question. I would like to thank you for joining the session, sir. This is a great opportunity to interact with you, and we will request our students to. I will share your email address to our students. So those who are interested, they will be calling you and they will be texting you and for internship or other startup ideas also. So you just cooperate with them, sir.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine if you want to give my email address out. I just ask people to understand if I don't respond, it could take a week depending on my schedule. So I just
Yes.
want people to understand
Yes.
that I don't necessarily have time to respond right away, but I will always respond, even if it takes a while.
Okay.
The other thing I want to say to you, Professor Kishan, is thank you for reaching out to me like you did.
Yes.
And if you want to do this, in another semester, I'm happy to do this again with you.
Okay.
I always enjoy this. I
Okay.
love talking with students because I want to know what they are fascinated by, what they're passionate about,
Okay.
and your questions help me understand
Yes, sir. Sure.
that.
Sure.
I have a question for you, if I may, or
Yes,
whoever
sir.
wants to answer.
Yes, sir.
So, is there, I said earlier, I don't really have a good picture in my mind of the startup space community in India. Is
Okay.
there much of that, or is it just starting to happen now? Help me understand that.
Sir, like private companies like Reliance, Tata, they are already having. But if you are speaking about startups, our aerospace engineers now only currently they are started to working on like 3D printing technology and other stuffs also. And most probably they are doing model rocketry. Many small startups came to develop model rockets, and some of the industries are working with ISRO also. And as you said, ISRO is also doing a great job in developing this type of startups. And
Good.
in next 10 next 10 years, you may find more aerospace startups, especially space startups in India. That is for
Good.
sure. Yes, sir.
Yeah, every so let me start over again. So last year, I was invited to go to China for a week to speak on a panel at a commercial space conference, and that coincided with the United Nations has the what they call the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and a couple of years ago, that organization developed a list of, I forget, 12, 15 sustainability initiatives. Well, actually, I don't know if it came out of that part of the UN, but the UN has a set of sustainability initiatives that are, intended to be guidelines for countries to develop more sustainable, agriculture, transportation, everything, right? We all know what sustainability means. So at the time that I was in China, in the same city, was the UN conference was going on for a couple of days, sponsored by COPAS, that part of the UN, and I got to hear over the course of a day. I was only able to go for one day, but I got to hear speakers from government space agencies across Africa and the Middle East talk about how they use satellites and the data that those satellites gather, Earth observation data, to help meet those sustainability initiatives. So it just occurred to me that is something that y'all might want to look into. Just Google UN sustainability initiatives, and you'll eventually find that list. And that might be something else to think about in terms of what can you do as an entrepreneur where you might be more likely to get funding. Well, sustainability and environment are really big issues now, and a lot of investors care about that and are putting money into startups. And I'm seeing this in terms of startups in the commercial and the small satellite industry. They're focused on, like, there's a couple, for example, in different countries that are focused on how to monitor forest fires and gather data real time. Others are focused on agricultural diseases, right? So these are some ways that satellites are being used to support sustainability initiatives. Those are, I would say, areas of market growth. So that could be another way that an entrepreneur can find out, where am I likely to get funding? What's the need that I can meet with my company and my technology? So I just thought about that in response to your comment, Professor.
Okay, sir. Okay, that's great, sir. That's great.
Well, it's been
So
a pleasure. I've enjoyed this. So, like
yes,
I
sir.
said, sir, I'm happy to do this again with you another
Yes, sir.
semester.
Sure. When the situation is normal, like COVID-19 is normal, we will surely invite you for a lecture again through webinar. We can have same type of webinar where we will be having the students in the session, so they will be asking the questions, and you can have an interactive over with them.
I'm sorry, are you asking if I can do interactive one-on-one with the students?
No, sir. After the situation was normal, after the situation COVID is normal
Okay.
in
I
the
thought I heard
university,
you were
yes, in the
okay.
university, yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, like I said, if you want to organize something like this again, happy to participate.
Sure, sir. Sure.
Thank you
Sure.
so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your busy time you have brought and explained your ideas with us and demonstrated so many critical points in front of us. So much. Thank you so much, sir.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate I don't know how many of you are out there, but thank you so much
Yes,
for
sir.
listening in. And I hope my comments have been helpful, and I appreciate the questions very much.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir. We are
You all
signing
take
off.
care of
Yes, sir.
yourself. Be safe.
Take care, sir. Be safe.
Bye-bye.
You to be safe, sir. You to be safe. Yeah,
Thank
take
you.
care.